Who Gets to Decide? A liberty-based podcast that brings a little piece of sanity to a confused society drowning in a culture of craziness. And here is your host, Seth Martin.
Well, all right. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Who Gets to Decide. This is episode 642. I'm Seth Martin, your host. Thank you for joining me today. Glad you're here and happy you're listening. I want to take a break from the Epstein files, not because they're not important and there's not a lot of stuff coming out, but because there's going to be a new set of documents released here shortly, and they're going to basically unmask a lot of these names that are in here. And of course, that's going to accelerate this whole story even more. So I think I'm just going to wait. I mean, I think everybody knows the salaciousness of the Epstein situation. What we don't know, and we will continue to dig for, is what were the intelligence connections and how is that impacting our government, our ability to control our government, our ability to govern ourselves as our Constitution is supposed to account for. And so that is going to be a very critical piece. As many of you know, I think that's exactly what's happening. I think there's a big blackmail ring that even persists today that really keeps us, you and me, the people, from being able to control our politicians in a big way. Now, for years, people have been saying, well, it's because of the lobbying and things like this. And that has a big part. That's a big part of it for sure. But on all the important things, where Democrats and Republicans agree, I'm not so sure that's the case. I think this whole blackmail situation has a lot more to do with it. So we're going to be digging more into that as soon as some things come out and some credible sources are reporting on it that we can then comment on. But what I want to do today is I want to circle back to the Russia hoax in President Trump's first term, because and we spent a lot of time talking about this as well. This was unprecedented, okay? Completely unprecedented, what happened during Trump's first term. And half the country thought it was a big conspiracy theory, and our government would never do that. And, this is another one of those, it seems like all the important issues are kind of divided between people that have a healthy respect for what government actually is and all the normies that we're surrounded by. And look, it's not like I dislike normies or anything. I've got normies in my family. But I think in order to have a government of, for, and by the people, you just cannot take these people's word for it. You can't just, Barack Obama said this, so therefore that's true, You just cannot do that. And when you have a media that's complicit, that's, in on the joke or whatever, then it just makes it extremely difficult to get to the bottom of these things. And essentially what happens is these controversies, they incubate forever until somebody with the guts and the political will can come in and expose it all. And unfortunately, we just haven't had that in America. We just don't have politicians. We have a handful, but it's like Thomas Massey, Ro Khanna, Rand Paul, and then you got Tulsi Gabbard. We're going to be talking a lot about Tulsi Gabbard today. She's the director of national intelligence under Trump, and her team has uncovered this this was the kind of the origin of the Russia hoax. There was kind of two pieces to the origin of the Russia hoax. But without this piece, a lot of it wouldn't have lasted as long as it did, because the other piece that was kind of key to the Russia hoax was the Steele dossier. But the Steele dossier, fairly early on, within a year or two of coming out, people started to go, oh, that's a bunch of bullshit. There's no corroboration there. But this other piece that Tulsi Gabbard has uncovered was completely unknown. We knew that the FBI and the CIA talked, and they knew that Trump wasn't talking to Russians, or that Carter Page wasn't talking to Russians. We knew that, right? Because there was a lawyer who was prosecuted and disbarred over that, but there was nobody from the FBI that was prosecuted or held to account. A lot of people, including me, thought that was where the predicate was. That was the driving force behind the Russia hoax. Well, it turns out that's not what the driving force was. That while Barack Obama was still president, well, first of all, there's two things. Just real high level. When Barack Obama was president in September of 2016, his FBI decided to spy on Carter Page, like tap his phones, okay, with a two-tap hop, meaning they could listen to his calls and then anybody he talked to, okay? So the theory there is that in pretty short order, you got the whole Trump campaign being tapped. So that's number one. That happened in September of 2016. And then once Trump was elected, so in November, once Trump was elected, then the deep state was like, well, hold on a second. We can't let this guy, we got to kneecap this guy somehow. That was the attitude. We saw that in text between Peter Strzok and his girlfriend, the lady that was in the FBI. And then you had Peter Strzok going on 60 Minutes and just saying all kinds of things. Anyway, but what happened shortly thereafter, like after the first of the year, like maybe in early December, mid-December, this intelligence report came out, okay, that reported on the election. And this intelligence report was made up from multiple agencies within the U.S. government. And it basically said that, yes, Russia meddled in our election, but it had no impact on the outcome. Barack Obama and his team decided to change that intelligence report and have it say that, yes, the Russians did meddle in the election. They wanted Trump to win, and it did have an impact on the outcome, and which is just complete fabrication. And this is what this and the Steele dossier, the tap on Carter Page, all this led to just Trump's first presidency being just under investigation the whole time. And this was essentially like a coup of a legitimately elected president. And this is just unbelievable that this happened in the United States of America. And so many people for the longest time were like, that's a conspiracy theory. That didn't really happen, And what's interesting about all these conspiracy theories is if given enough time, they just come true. I mean, the only difference between a conspiracy theory and fact is some number of days that it takes to uncover it. The whole election was stolen when Biden, that was a conspiracy theory, right? Well, no, what we're finding out now is no, in fact, it did happen. There were hundreds of thousands of votes that were fraudulent, that were added to Biden and subtracted from Trump. I mean, so these things are happening, okay? My big question, and this is where I think the Epstein stuff ties in, is why is this happening? I mean, it's certainly not happening because you and me are voting for it, okay? And certainly our elected officials, the people we're voting for, are not doing it because we want them to do it, right? So the question is, why is it happening? And this is where the Epstein piece really ties in. So I thought it was relevant to talk about this again, because it's all tied together. We talked also about the capture of Nicolas Maduro, and how Smartmatic and Dominion voting are somehow tied in with that. We don't know the full story on that. So that's related. So all this stuff is related. All these events are related in the bigger topic of who is subverting the will of the people in America. How is that happening? And this thing here that we're going to talk about today was a big part of that. It's a Fox News deal. It's Jesse Waters. he goes through a summary. So we're gonna do that, and then we'll kind of go from there. So, all right, let's start this Fox News report from Jesse Waters and see if you can. And I'll kind of jump in because it's kind of confusing, like the timing of things and stuff. So I'll jump in and kind of fill those gaps. But he does a really good job of summarizing all this. All right, here we go.
Fox News alert, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, releasing a bombshell report today that shows a conspiracy by a sitting president, Barack Obama, and his intel agencies to sabotage the president-elect, Donald Trump, brainwash the electorate, and undermine the legitimacy of an election.
There is irrefutable evidence that detail how President Obama and his national security team directed the creation of an intelligence community assessment that they knew was false. They knew it would promote this contrived narrative that Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help President Trump win, selling it to the American people as though it were true. It wasn't.
Gabbard got her hands on a House intel report that's been locked away in a CIA vault for almost a decade. Investigators spent over 2,000 hours looking into how the Russia hoax was born, interviewing 20 CIA and FBI officials. And it turns out that the Obama administration doctored the intelligence to make it look like Putin and Trump stole the election. A month after Trump beat Hillary, Barack Obama wasn't satisfied with his intelligence reporting and ordered his CIA director to create a new assessment of how Russia interfered with the election. This was a highly unusual move. John Brennan handpicked 5 CIA analysts to write the assessment, and they were siloed. None of them knew what the other was doing. And only one analyst was in charge of drafting this report. There was nothing routine about this, and it was a rush job to publish before Trump was sworn in. Nothing was coordinated with the other intelligence agencies either. Basically, this was home cooking for Barack Obama. There were 4 key elements from the assessment that were repeated over and over again and formed the basis of the Russia hoax and the Robert Mueller witch hunt. 1, that Vladimir Putin wanted Donald Trump to win. 2, Putin took action to help Trump win. 3, the Russians had blackmail on Trump. That was the Steele dossier. And 4, that the Russians tried colluding with the Trump campaign. None of any of this was ever true. There was no reliable intelligence to support any of these allegations. Senior CIA officials repeatedly refused to traffic in these allegations, but they were repeatedly overruled by CIA Director Brennan and FBI Director Comey.
All right, before we get into those clips, that is extraordinary. I mean, I just, it can't be overstated how unprecedented this was and how, I don't know how you would describe it. I mean, the only way to describe this is just illegal. This is illegal. This is a subversion of the transfer of power. You know, it's interesting because, you know, they were talking about Trump on January 6th, how Trump was interfering with the peaceful transfer of power and all this. Well, what the hell is this? I mean, at least that was a protest, you know, where people didn't believe it or whatever. This is just a complete subversion of our processes, our intelligence gathering procedures. You know, there's all kinds of procedures and policies and rules that they follow when they're doing these kinds of intelligence assessments. And the reason they have rules is so that politicians can't manipulate it. That's the whole reason. Like what happened when we invaded Iraq, weapons of mass destruction and all this kind of stuff. Or, you know, I'm not going to get into it today, but, you know, the whole run up into 9/11, Afghanistan, all that was just a big fabrication. It was a huge production to manipulate people, you and me, to, you know, hate Arabs and go invade their land. Okay. This has got to stop, right? This manipulation of the public. See, here's the kind of I don't know if it's a dirty little secret, but, you know, what they do is they have to have the consent of the governed. Okay. That's a big thing in America. we govern by consent. This is all voluntary. This is kind of like what Tucker Carlson was talking about. Well, this is all voluntary, you know? And so we need the consent of the people in order to do the things that that we want to do, okay? And so what they do is they craft narratives, and they use the media to sell the narrative and all this kind of stuff. It's all just a big manipulation. And in this case, they took it a step further because there was going to be a special counsel. They needed documentation to show that their narrative was true. This is incredible that official government documents were modified to paint this picture, to create this narrative. And, if you sign something, you can't lie to the federal government. You can't sign a document that says something that let's say do you agree to this, and you sign it, but you actually don't, or you actually, on paper, you lied. They will prosecute you, okay? But what happened here, and so this goes into the category of these laws are not for them, okay? These laws are for us. All these laws that we have, they're to control us, not to control the politicians. But the purpose of our Constitution and the laws surrounding it is to bind down the people that have the power, okay? That's the purpose. And what we're finding in America is we're not fulfilling that purpose, okay? The Constitution doesn't fulfill that purpose. The institutions surrounding the Constitution and the government do not fulfill that particular purpose. In fact, they've been subverted to the point where powerful people cannot be held accountable at all. I mean, we're seeing this with the Epstein stuff, right? You got people in here that clearly committed crimes in these Epstein files. Or either that or they were just making stuff up to be, I don't know what, I don't know why you would say those things. And I can't believe that would come under the category of bragging, some of the stuff we've seen in the Epstein files. But you got people that appear to be committing crimes, and yet they're walking around free. Nobody even went and asked them any questions, okay? That's how free they are. And meanwhile, 1,200 people on January 6th spent 4 years in jail for protesting what was obviously a stolen election, okay? Obviously. If you just look at the trend of, we've talked about this before, but if you look at the elections preceding 2020 and even the election after in 2024, there was a huge spike in vote total. Are you telling me that many people turned out to vote for Joe Biden, this loser that nobody cares about, that spent 50 years in the Senate doing nothing except stealing? Okay? Nobody cared about Joe Biden. Nobody was excited about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But somehow he got 12 million more or 11 million more votes than anybody in the history of America ever. Okay? We just don't have control over the government. The question is, why don't we have control? Who is pulling the strings? And maybe it's this Epstein stuff, right? That's why the Epstein files are so important. Because it tends to fill in the gap here of what we can't explain. And what we can't explain is, why is all this happening? Why do we have a government that is not for the people, not of the people, and not by the people? Why do we have a government that's for these rich and powerful people who are essentially untouchable, that can do anything they want and get fabulously rich at our expense? Why is that? And potentially, the Epstein story fills that gap. But all of this is related, okay? All of it is. There's some kind of overarching effort to undermine the will of the people, what the people want in America, okay? And this Russia hoax was just one of several, but it was an important one because it goes all the way to the top, the very top. Barack Obama himself sat in a meeting with John Brennan and James Clapper and what was her name? Not Loretta Lynch, but the other, Susan Rice, okay, and a couple other people, and they just decided they were going to do this. And so Barack Obama ordered this to happen. That is treason, okay? That's no different than if you lost the election, gathered the military, and put them around the White House and said, I'm not leaving, I'm staying in power. It's the same thing, okay? And we know that's treasonous because all the Democrats told us that that's what happened on January 6th. So anyway, let's continue here, but just extraordinary stuff here.
Who insisted that they be pushed, even without verifiable evidence. The Obama administration cherry-picked the intelligence, lied about their sources, misquoted sources, didn't corroborate their claims, suppressed intelligence that ran counter to their narratives, and even used anonymous internet postings. Rank and file CIA admitted what they were doing violated their own tradecraft standards. There was a massive pressure campaign that came right from the top. CIA analysts say they received unusual directives from political appointees, the CIA director, and Obama himself. This is how the Russia hoax was born.
Donald Trump knows that the Russians helped him win in 2016.
Putin hated Secretary Clinton so much that the flip side of that coin was he had a clear preference for the person running against the person he hated so much.
It was Russia in a very systematic way tried to interfere in the election and to try to advance the prospects of Donald Trump being elected.
This was such a malicious disinformation campaign perpetrated on the American people that at one point, 60% of Democrats believed the Russians hacked our voting machines to help Trump win the White House. What this report actually shows is that the Russians just wanted to create chaos and undermine Americans' faith in democracy. Solid intelligence suggested that Vladimir Putin didn't care who won. He had no preference. But like most people, expected Hillary to win and had a little docket of compromising dirt on her, dirt that he never released. Now, if Putin wanted Trump to win, why didn't Putin drop the dirt?
There were high-level DNC emails that detailed evidence of Hillary's, quote, psycho-emotional problems, uncontrolled fits of anger, aggression, and cheerfulness, and that then Secretary Clinton was allegedly on a daily regimen of heavy tranquilizers. Then CIA Director Brennan and the intelligence community mischaracterized intelligence and relied on dubious substandard sources to create a contrived false narrative that Putin developed a quote-unquote clear preference for Trump.
Now, if Clinton was on tranquilizers like...
All right. Yeah. I don't know if y'all remember this, but remember when Hillary Clinton was getting into the van after some public event and the security people had to catch her and kind of carry her into the van? I mean, she was clearly, something was wrong, some sort of health problem or something. And maybe it was these tranquilizers. I don't know. But yeah, can you believe, all that stuff you heard, James Comey, he was saying that stuff in front of Congress. So that's prison. Okay. You can go to jail for that. You lie to Congress, go to jail. Do not pass go. Don't collect $200. You're going to jail. That's the rule. Okay. Notice that they said that Putin wanted Clinton to lose. And there was no evidence of this. This was just part of the narrative that they all told. But the biggest thing is the intelligence report was modified. That is the biggest thing. And of course, all this other stuff just happened because of that. The news media reported on it. Everybody just followed right in line. And there was just no way they could conceive that this was all just contrived, by the government, by the highest levels of government. They just wouldn't even consider that. Barack Obama, he's a constitutional lawyer. He wouldn't do that. He's a constitutional scholar. That's how they used to frame his knowledge. Yeah, well, that means he knows exactly how to do it and maybe minimize the trouble. But, to me, this was just so shocking. And normies, oh my God. You know how many people I talked to about this? And they were just like, oh, Seth. Just like they had a crystal ball and knew the absolute truth. I was just, in my head too much, or you fall for these things too easily. All these things people were telling me. No, what you have to have, let me just give you the secret. Government is always lying. Okay? Period. Full stop. Government is always conniving and scheming and stealing and doing all these things that most of us hate. That's what they do all the time. Okay? So when it smells a little bit fishy, when it smells like bullshit, okay, it most likely is. That's the rule. Okay? It's not the opposite. Oh, our government is above board and no, that's the wrong way to think about government. They're always trying to scheme and lie and manipulate and cheat and steal. Okay? That's what government does. Okay? And this is how I knew, I'm holding up air fingers quotes, because I didn't know. Nobody knows until now, right? Nobody really knew. But you just were like, this is ridiculous. I mean, if you looked at, like, I can't remember what the numbers were now, but like in the most recent election where Trump was elected, I think he got 77 million votes. But I think in the election in 2016, he got like 74 million. But in 2020, 81 million people voted for Biden. Really? Really? I don't think so. That just seems, it smells like bullshit. Okay. And then you start seeing this video footage of trucks showing up in the middle of the night and they closed the polls. I mean, remember that? They closed the polls at like midnight and stopped counting. When has that ever happened before? So you start connecting these dots and you're like, oh yeah, there's something going on here. I don't know what it is exactly, but there's something going on here. And there's no way Biden got 81 million votes. I mean, it's just, or just look at the way presidents are elected. How would you ever manipulate that without it being an inside job? No, in other words, it would be very, very difficult for an outside entity to manipulate our elections. And the reason is because everything's by state. And so it's, they would have to have knowledge of how to bring in votes in certain districts and certain counties. And I mean, it would just be, they would have to have a lot of knowledge about our election system. And, our own people can't even predict, what's going to happen in an election, a presidential election. So to do that and actually do it in a way that is predictive is very, very difficult. And it would be extremely difficult for an outside country to do it. So just, with all this kind of stuff, you just go, yeah, that's bullshit. That didn't happen. And all the stuff they had, Don Jr. meeting with this Russian lawyer. Well, she was talking, he took the meeting because they were talking about orphanages or something. And then she switched the subject on him. She was like a plant. And this is it. The Trump family is going to be going to jail. I mean, Adam Schiff every day was coming out in the media telling us how this is the smoking gun, where there's smoke, there's fire. I mean, just breathlessly, trying to gin up Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, that's essentially what happened. People in the media had it. People in the electorate had it. He said it's at one point 60% of all Democrats thought that Russia colluded with Trump to steal the 2016 election. Because in their mind, there was just no conceivable way that Hillary Clinton could lose to Trump. She's such a stateswoman and he's such a loser, I mean, this is the nature of populism, by the way. People, these populists like Trump, can get elected when enough stuff is not going the way it's supposed to be going. And that's clearly the problem. The government is not working for a huge number of Americans. Well, that's what creates populism. And Trump is a populist. It's as simple as that. All right, let's continue with this.
The Russians believed, why didn't they leak it to help Trump win?
How credible was the information about Hillary Clinton's power?
All I have seen is what the Intelligence Committee have reported through their investigation. I think that the underlying point there is that we understand from intelligence what Russia said that they had. And the important point here is that if they were trying to influence the election, as President Obama and James Clapper and John Brennan, everybody said they were doing in order to support Donald Trump's election, they would have released the most damning of that information.
Obama and his spy chiefs knew that Putin didn't prefer Trump over Hillary, but they cooked the intelligence to make it look like he did. Obama and his intel spies knew that Putin didn't collude with Trump and that he didn't even direct his people to help Trump win. But they put it out there anyway. In a sense, Barack Obama did exactly what Putin wanted, undermined Americans' faith in free and fair elections and caused chaos in our country. Barack Obama.
That's a great point. There's two things here. One, the thing that Russia really wanted to do was just kind of create chaos and just really kind of go, see, your elections don't mean anything and all this kind of stuff. But that was accomplished. Why was it accomplished? Because of what Barack Obama did. That's the irony of the whole thing. It's really incredible, actually. The other thing I was going to mention, and I forgot what I was going to say, but just that alone, there was a lot of damage. If you're a Democrat and you think voting, I got air fingers quotes, is sacred, okay? Your right to vote is that's you speaking to the government about what you want government to do or not do on your behalf. If you really believe that, you got to be appalled at what the Obama administration did after Trump was elected. Okay? Typically that period is called the lame duck president, right? Because everybody knows a new president's coming in. There's going to be a new agenda. So Congress kind of thumbs their nose at the president and they don't, we're done listening to you, dude. You're on your way out. But man, did he make the best of his lame duck session? I mean, in a criminal way, but nevertheless, he essentially said, I'm not going to be a lame duck. I'm going to make this guy's life a total hell. And I mean, this is just unbelievable. And John Brennan, these guys all had contracts with CNN, and they can see intelligence. Because they could see the intelligence, they're given this level of credibility, air fingers quotes, credibility. And so CNN's just lapping it up every day. Adam Schiff just lying straight through his teeth, every single day. And then the predicate for the whole, this led to the predicate for the special counsel, so there's a year and a half. Oh, I know what the other point I was going to make was. We had a situation where we really needed to get along with Russia, right? I mean, that situation exists today. Russia is the only other country in the world that has the sheer number of nuclear weapons that we have. So we need to be talking to these people on an ongoing basis. We need to not move without talking to them about what they think about the move, and vice versa. But instead, what happened is this whole Russia hoax thing drove a wedge into the relationship between Russia and the United States of America, and really kneecapped Trump in his ability to communicate with Putin and to negotiate and to do diplomacy. And this was probably, out of all the harm that was done, this was probably the most harmful part, is that it interfered with diplomacy. And Trump himself has said that. So, this is really bad, and hopefully somebody goes to jail. Now, there was some Supreme Court ruling a while back about whether or not you could prosecute a former president, and the Supreme Court said no. So I don't know that there's any path for doing anything to Barack Obama, but certainly John Brennan, James Clapper, Jim Comey, Susan Rice, all these people. I mean, just start digging into it, start pulling on those threads, find out who knew, when they knew it, and whether or not they pushed back on it. Or, I mean, I don't think anybody resigned. So I don't remember Susan Rice saying, Mr. President, you can't do this, and I'm going to resign if you do it. I don't remember any of that happening. So apparently all these people were complicit in all this.
The CIA and the FBI were the ones doing what our enemy wanted.
Do you believe that any of this new information implicates former President Obama in criminal behavior?
We have referred and will continue to refer all of these documents to the Department of Justice and the FBI to investigate the criminal implications of this.
For even former
The
President
evidence,
Obama?
correct. The evidence that we have found and that we have released directly point to President Obama leading the manufacturing of this intelligence assessment. There are multiple pieces of evidence and intelligence that confirm that fact.
Even 2 years later, after the election, Barack Obama was still pushing a hoax he knew wasn't true. And he knew it wasn't true because he helped manufacture it.
They're undermining our alliances, cozying up to Russia. What happened to the Republican Party? They're cozying up to the former head of the KGB. Actively blocking legislation that would defend our elections from Russian attack. What happened?
Now, I don't know if it's possible to indict a former...
What a liar. My God. You know, look, everybody knows politicians lie, right? There's no surprise there. But he is lying about such a dangerous thing. I mean, it's not like I've talked about this before about how Trump's lies are like what I call ego lies. Oh, I had more people at my inaugural address than Barack Obama did. Who cares? Why do people get all twisted out of shape about that kind of lie? And then this lie doesn't seem to bother him at all. Lying in general, just across the board, is bad, right? I mean, nobody's going to try to dispute that. But certainly when you're comparing lies, the type of lies that Barack Obama, John Brennan, James Clapper, Susan Rice, Jim Comey, Peter Strzok, all these people, the kind of lies that they were telling were so much worse than, at my inaugural address, there was a lot more people there than Barack Obama had. What are we even talking about here? Who cares? What I care about is that, if you elect somebody president, look at what happened to Richard Nixon in the early 70s, okay, with Watergate. Watergate was nothing compared to this. This is like, I don't know how you could measure how much worse this is than Watergate, but it's got to be like 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times worse. And there was real risk here. There was real risk that you could escalate a kind of a negative interaction between Russia and the United States. And that is very, very dangerous. I don't know, man. I don't know if we can prosecute this guy or not, but we should damn sure try. This guy should spend the rest of his days in Fort Leavenworth. And if we can't get the regular courts to do it, then maybe there needs to be some sort of military tribunal or something. If the Supreme Court says that you can't prosecute this guy, maybe there's some way to look at a military tribunal and say, look, because of the grave risk that Barack Obama put us in with Russia, we're going to have to we're going to have to handle this through the military, because this could have led to war. It could have, this is potential war crime or whatever. I mean, I don't know, but man, I just don't think you can let this go unchecked. The problem with not prosecuting people when they break the law is, in their mind, they're getting away with it. And so there's just more of it. It's like taxing. If you tax something, you get less of it. If you don't tax something, you get more of it. If you prosecute something, you get less of it. If you don't prosecute something, you get more of it. So if we all of a sudden stop prosecuting murder, murder was not a thing and there was no consequences, you could say, well, the murder rate is likely to go up. And you would be right, because that's likely what would happen. All right, let's wrap this up, and then we'll wrap up the show. Let me play the rest of it here.
President for actions he took while in office. I'm not a lawyer, proudly. But Brennan, Comey, and others may have severe liability. Trey Gowdy says we know for a fact that Brennan committed perjury when he lied to Congress.
Director Brennan, do you know who commissioned the Steele dossier?
I don't.
Do you know if the Bureau ever relied on the Steele dossier as part of any court filings, applications?
I have no awareness.
Did the CIA rely on it?
No.
Why not?
because it wasn't part of the corpus of intelligence information that we had. It was not in any way used as a basis for the intelligence community assessment that was done. It was not.
Well, that's a lie. Whatever happens to these guys is not revenge. It's accountability. And it's time for people to pay the price.
Okay. When someone like Trey Gowdy, who's a lawyer, is asking questions like that, he already knows the answers. Okay. He already knows that John Brennan knows that they relied on the Steele dossier. So for him to ask it, he already knew the answer to that, and he knows that John Brennan lied. Now, I don't know, man. There's 3 years left in Trump's, presidency. Maybe not. Maybe the midterms, there's a big washout and he's impeached again, and maybe this time removed from office. I don't know. But if you're going to start prosecuting these people, you got to get started, right? Because I don't think we're going to ever have another Trump as a president, somebody who just doesn't get along with the deep state. And this may be the only time ever that we're going to be able to make an example of really, really bad people that put our country. Look, make no mistake about it. If this created a big conflict with Russia and a war, these people would be sending your children into the conflict and telling you that it was their duty and their patriotic duty to go fight on behalf of Americans for freedom. We fight them over there so we don't have to fight them over here. That bullshit. That's all just horse shit, okay? There's nobody trying to take away our freedom in America except these people in Washington, D.C. That's it. Those are the people trying to take away our freedom. Russia's not trying to take away our freedom. Venezuela's not trying to take away our freedom. Iraq is not trying to take away our freedom. Syria, Iran, none of these countries are trying to take away your freedom, okay? The people trying to take away your freedom and your life and your liberty are the people that work in Washington, D.C. and have a career in the U.S. government. That's just a fact. And the sooner we all come to that realization, the sooner we can reclaim what is ours, what is our God-given right and codified in our founding documents. I mean, it's not, you could always say that it's your God-given right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, okay? But what's unique about America is we codified that belief in our founding documents, okay? But that needs to be reclaimed because it has slipped away from us as a people. We've allowed them to encroach on that to the point where it just doesn't really exist anymore. And so, a good first step would be to show these people in power, these elites, that you can't do that. We're not going to allow you to do that. And what I say is, if you can't do it through the justice system, like if the Department of Justice doesn't want to take up this mantle, then I say empower the military to do it. And you just say, look, the Department of Justice can't investigate itself. So the military is going to come in. We're going to have tribunals, and we're going to wrap this up real quick. And I'm okay with that because to fight a government, you almost need another government. Okay, like to take on Washington D.C., you need Texas, but these states have been somewhat neutered, and they don't have the power that they used to have. The next best thing would be to empower the military structure to handle this and just say, look, it's outside of the purview. The DOJ can't investigate itself. And so we're going to have the military investigate it. The military, does this all the time. I mean, they've got lawyers, you got JAG lawyers and stuff. They have their own court system. It just is not bogged down with the political piece that our normal court system is. All right. Well, listen, everybody, thanks for listening. You can see I'm very passionate about this. I think this was a bridge too far, obviously, and it needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with. I mean, at this point, you can't say it needs to be dealt with swiftly because it happened 10 years ago, but it needs to be dealt with, and it needs to be dealt with swiftly now that it's all official. And maybe the best way to do that is to use military tribunals and the military court system. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. If you would share the show, go to YouTube. For those of you who are listening on podcast, go to YouTube, watch it, subscribe, and share there. That'll help the algorithm. And when, I don't know, in a few days, come back in, we'll have another episode for you on Who Gets to Decide. All right, everybody, I'm out. Peace.